Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon to all of you. So, topic for today is the management of complications of after ear surgery. It's a very interesting and a very clinical topic. So, I think that it might be of interest to all of you rather than topics which basically deal with pharmacokinesis and pharmacogenesis and so on and so forth. So, this is a very interesting topic, management of complications after ear surgery, right? This can address both. This can address the ENT consultants, and this can address the general practitioners also, because most of the time after surgery, the patients do visit the surgeon for a little period of time, but later on they go to the general practitioner. So this can basically enlighten both the ENT consultants as well as the general practitioners. So I've got a table of contents for basically my presentation. The first is what are the factors which lead to surgical therapy? Because chronic otitis media is a disease. It's a huge disease, basically comprising of many parts. I won't go into the details of those, but I'll just tell you that what are the factors basically which can lead to basic chronic otitis media. Then the second would be the surgical options, and what are the risk of ear surgery, and then of course what are the complications, which was primary our topic, and management of infections on the surgical site of postoperative care. So let's start with the first one, which is what are the factors that lead to surgical therapy for chronic otitis media. Uh, there are two types mainly. There have been several classifications which have been made in the past, basically safe, unsafe, squamosal, mucosal, and then again tubotympanic, atyquantral. You can go for any classification. They have been modernized over the years, but I don't want to go into the detail. But clinically, there are two. One is the one with the cholesteatoma, and one is the other one which is without a cholesteatoma, which is mucosal, right? So for a cholesteatomatous disease, the treatment is surgery, unless there is a comorbidity or there is some binding factor, basically, because there are contraindications. There are so many. If there is a contraindication, then surgery should not be done, and you should go for medical measures. But if there is no basically comorbid condition or a contraindication for surgery, the treatment of anticontinental disease is surgery. Coming to the mucosal disease, it depends on the length and breadth of the disease, and depends on the discharging and non-discharging, or active or inactive. So you plan according to it. But initially, you start with medical treatment. Then, of course, you wait for a little time for a broader light. एक broader page आपको अगर दूं इसकी technically तो बहुत सारे the answers are very technical, but in a broader aspect, आप पहले कोशिश you would like to do is dry the ear. If your treatment basically, if you've got a medium sized perforation, not a small perforation, because small perforations, they tend to heal on their own. अगर पर्दे में एक दफा सुराख हो जाए, first time, second time पे आपके पास आता है, or he's got a hole in the perforation in the eardrum, तो आप basically don't embark on any sort of, आप जैसे GP हैं तो फौरी कंसल्टेंट को रेफर करना सर्जरी के लिए, या अगर कंसल्टेंट है you should wait for a while, because the initial perforation, they heal on their own. If the patient is disease free, the size of the perforation is small, these perforations, they tend to heal on their own. There is no surgical maneuver or surgical procedure which should be done. हाँ, अगर perforation जो है basically medium size perforation है या large size perforation है for that matter, तो आपने you have to make your plan. Your plan is basically based on what sort of surgery would you like to do. What sort of surgery should consider. First of all, it should be a mastodectomy or a tympanoplasty. तो इसमें आपने, क्योंकि इसका इलाज यही है, इनिशियली मेडिकल ट्रीटमेंट आपने ड्राई किया, ड्राई करने के बाद एक खास पीरियड के लिए, some people say 6 weeks, some people say 6 months, and the ear remains dry, basically you do with a tympanoplasty, which is a lesser complicated or lesser basically skill demanding operation as compared to mastodectomy. There are quite a few approaches basically for chronic otitis media. Ear के लिए तो बहुत सारी approach हैं, लेकिन chronic otitis media के लिए there are two basically more important approaches. One is the endoral approach, or the second is the postoral approach. The endoral approach is recommended जहाँ पर disease inactive हो basically, and you have got a limited basically access. It's basically cosmetically or post-operative care के हिसाब से it's very good. you do an endoral, but limited access disease के लिए it's more beneficial as compared to extensive disease. Post-oral is usually recommended for any sort of mastoid surgery. Dono, they are recommended. But as a surgeon, you make your plan that what sort of the surgery will be extensive or whatever, or it will be a canal down operation basically. So you have to make your plans and you devise your incision according to the plan. So post-oral incision usually is for intact canal wall mastoidectomy, revision, and total. Agar aapne ko mastoid operate, if you have made a big cavity and you want to obliterate the mastoid, you can do. आजकल जो है basically we go more for an inside out even to basically make sure that we don't make big cavities. Meatoplasty, of course, whenever you're doing a canal wall down operation, there are two types of meatoplasty. वैसे एक होता है bony meatoplasty, एक होता है जिसमें इंटेक canal wall भी होगी. You want to make a bony meatoplasty so that you want to enlarge the meatus, and a cartilaginous meatoplasty is usually done in cases basically when you have done canal wall down operation. Canal wall down operation के साथ you want to inspect the cavity and you want to aerate the cavity and you want a good drainage for the cavity, so the meatoplasty will definitely help in all these, and the ear will remain dry and you can always inspect, and there is form of any scab, you can always clean that scab. Post-operative care में you always use antibiotic steroid solutions. Basically आप cleansing के लिए use करते हैं after a successful operation. You follow-up is also very important in mastoid surgeries. Basically think that your hairs after any sort of surgery is discharging, or you need to go in, you need to clean with antibiotic solutions, with steroids sometimes locally advised to reduce the inflammation. Then you can inspect and you can basically calculate your results, that what sort of results you are getting. Don't think that only performing surgery is the art, and if you leave the patient post-operatively, you don't take care. That's an important step that you have missed, and your basically success depends on post-operative basically follow-up. In the clinical, there is a condition which is known as tympanosclerosis, where after any sort of discharge of the air, most commonly after discharge, basically there is a white plaque which is formed on the tympanic membrane. These white plaques can be single, they can be multiple, sometimes they can coalesce, बहुत सारे मिल जाएं, or they make a big plaque. So when there is a plaque, basically it hinders the surface of the tympanic membrane. Basically, what it does is it collects the sound, and from here it transmits through small bones into the inner ear. So this surface area, because of this white plaque which doesn't participate in the movement, gets lost. So there is a conductive hearing loss which may occur because of this tympanosclerotic plaque. So if there is a plaque and it is very big, what you do is basically you take out this plaque, and after taking out this plaque, if there is a deficit in the tympanic membrane, you repair the deficit in the tympanic membrane. When you have got aggressive, active chronic otitis media, as I told you earlier, that you need to divide into squamosal and mucosal disease. Squamosal, of course, which has got a cholesteatoma, and mucosal, in which there is extensive granulation, and despite all your measures to treat it conservatively, it's not responding to any sort of medical treatment. As I told you earlier also, I would again reaffirm my statement given earlier that in a cholesteatoma, the treatment, if somebody asks you what's the disease, what's the cholesteatoma or anticontrol or squamosal disease, the treatment is surgery. Unless and until there is a coexistent morbidity which is basically preventing you, or there is sort of extensive contraindication which is preventing you to do the surgery. Surgical options for chronic ear infections. It's just an overview. Myringoplasty is a part of operation which is known as tympanoplasty. It's a type 1 tympanoplasty, in which what you do is basically you repair the hole. It is done by different methods. Different people take different grafts. They have got different methods like underlay, onlay, and there are different sort of grafts. They are usually autografts. Auto means from the same patient. They use the graft. Like most of the time, all of us usually, except for a few, we used temporal sphacia and perichondrium basically to cover the defect, and different techniques are used. But nowadays, usually the most accredited is the underlay technique. So it's an operation which you close down. It's a type 1 tympanoplasty. Surgery, some people, usually people perform in general anesthesia, but there are situations in which if the general anesthesia is not available, especially in camps and all, so people have seen that they do it under local anesthesia as well. Then the mastectomy basically can be divided now into canal wall up and canal wall down operations. I don't want to go into detail. Canal wall down, just for you to know that what's a canal wall down. In between the mastoid cavity and the middle ear, there is a wall. If you lower that wall, it becomes a canal wall down, because this converts the mastoid cavity and the middle ear into a single cavity. And canal wall up is in which you preserve this wall. The importance is when you preserve this wall, your aim to reconstruct becomes very easy. If the canal wall down, if the canal wall down procedure is adopted, the reconstruction becomes very, very difficult. In meatoplasty, I've told you that when you're doing a modified radical or a radical cavity in which the canal wall is lowered down, there is a huge cavity there. You take a part of the cartilaginous meatus basically and do a meatoplasty so that this whole external meatus, which is here, gets enlarged. And you can easily aerate the cavity, you can easily inspect the cavity. And if there is any debris, extra, which is present in there, you can always clean it. Then there is an operation of the ear which is known as myringotomy, as the name suggests. Myringotomy is pulling the tympanic membrane and putting in these tubes are known as ventilation tubes. These tubes are known as grommets. They're commonly used in children. In children, there is a condition which is known as secretory otitis media, in which basically a glue-like secretion accumulates in the middle ear, and it hampers or it impedes the sound waves and causes conductive deafness. The child becomes a little hard of hearing. The deafness is conductive deafness. And after doing a certain test, basically like a pure tone audiometry or impedance, in which you measure the pressure, you come to know that there is some problem in the middle ear. And this problem is because of some sort of glue, which is you do an operation which is known as myringotomy, and you do a bilateral grommet or a ventilation tube insertion. The tubes usually you don't have to take them out; they come out on their own after a period of 6 to 12 months, and a small opening. Of course, with the myringotome is the instrument which is taken for doing all that. And the canal wall down mastectomy is for patients basically, as I told you earlier, also for patients who have got cholesteatoma, and this basically comprises of a dichotomy or modified radical. It depends on nowadays basically to avoid the big cavities. They perform an operation which is known as inside-out operation. We also do that. The operation is basically in which you follow the disease. You follow the cholesteatoma from the rather than coming from the mastoid cavity to the middle ear. You basically follow the disease from the attic, because usually in the attic and the Prusak space. So you follow the disease from here and you go back and you make a cavity accordingly, according to the extension of the disease, according to the basically wherever areas the disease has gone, rather than making a whole big cavity from the beginning, from the post-oral incision, and then coming here. You do an inside out, you go from the inside to the out so that the cavities are basically small cavities are formed, and you don't have that problem which I told you earlier, that debris, scab formation, and maximum hearing loss. And I told you that myringoplasty is a part of tympanoplasty. Tympanoplasty basically can be classified into 5 types, which is usually a classification given by Wolstein, but I won't go into the details of that classification. I'll tell you the purpose. It's basically to eradicate the disease from the middle ear and go into the small spaces of the ear and basically eradicate the disease from there. Then, of course, the improvement of hearing. The improvement of hearing can be done in 2 ways. One is by the reconstruction of the tympanic membrane, and second is by doing ossicleplasties. There are 3 important ossicles which are here. One is malleus, the second is incus, and the third is stapes. So what we can do is basically, if any of the, usually incus is the most commonly involved, basically ossicle in the disease process. So you have got a lot of procedures in which you do ossicleplasties, that is reconstruction of the ossicles, and then according with the reconstruction of the tympanic membrane. So it's ossicular and tympanic reconstruction of the ear. That's a part of tympanoplasty. I told you that in children, basically, these gromets are commonly used, and with a minimum duration of 3 months, even you can cover a loss of 25 decibels, right? And sometimes in acute mastocytitis, in acute otitis media rather, when you are expecting that the drum is going to perforate, and the drum will perforate on its own, basically what happens is that it will just burst out with ragged edges. But if you give an incision, if you are anticipating that it will burst, it's a bulging tympanic membrane, it's a red tympanic membrane with a pulsatile thing with the patient ears, then you can take the patient to OR and do a tympanotomy, take out the whatever pus is there, and your incision will be clean incision, so there is always a chance that it will heal on its own, rather than a perforated drum, which basically has got ragged edges, in which you basically the healing may occur and sometimes may occur with a plaque also. Chronic otitis media, with these are different things about basically ventilation tubes, but I don't want you to go into all those details. And the surgical procedure, but things one is important, which is one is anesthesia, can be applied basically in adults. It can be done in what you call general anesthesia, but in children can be done in general anesthesia, and adults basically, if it's a cooperative adult, you can do it in local anesthesia. And definitely we have to use an operating microscope in this. For long-term ventilation, there are people basically who might be coming to the consultants or to the जनरल प्रैक्टिशनर्स की जी हमने अपने बच्चे का करवा लिया था ग्रोमेट, लेकिन वो ग्रोमेट निकल गया, उसके कान दोबारा वैसे हो गए. So what they do is basically they can do an operation again and put in the grommet, or basically they can use a T tube. There is a T tube which is here used as well, just like a T, inverted T. There's a T straight and inverted T. The inverted T, inverted portion will stay inside and the other portion will stay outside. So this will not be extruded, or it can remain in place for about 3 years. Okay? But इसके साथ problem थोड़ा सा क्या होता है कि in 20% of the cases there might be a chronic perforation which may be there. Secretive otitis media का तो problem ठीक हो गया, लेकिन a small perforation sometimes might be there, basically with a T tube. Sometimes what happens is that ventilation tube falls into the middle ear. This can happen, but tubes are usually inert, and they usually don't cause any sort of damage. Or to take out removal basically of potential formality reaction, some people do that, some people leave that, they put another grommet. But if the grommet is closed and you can be seen through, you should always try to retrieve with a small. But if अगर आपकी confine से आपकी आंखों की नजर से ओझल हो गया, if it's gone out of your eyesight, the best opinion given by all the what you call authorities is that please don't go after it. Surgical removal, when one has healed entire tympanic membrane with a wide laryngotomy and removal of the ventilation tube, that can be done, but very rarely you have to do a exploratory tympanotomy. I have discussed adenoids here because adenoids and grommets usually go together, and you must have all seen as a general practitioner, as a ENT consultant, basically what you see is that adenoids and grommet insertions, and usually adenoid tonsils and grommet insertions, they go together, because adenoids basically is a condition which is seen in children, and in children the suction tube openings are also very straight, and they're easily malleable, because once the adenoid grows up, it goes the suction tube opening, creating the negative pressure, creating the secretive otitis media, and so on, an indication for putting in the grommet. So I have discussed adenoidectomy here a little, and little is that usually they are combined with tonsillectomy and insertion of grommets. The symptoms are there. Everybody probably knows that you've got a sleep apnea sort of condition, in which there is a lot of snoring, there is nasal obstruction, and there is of course a constant rhinorrhea which is present, a typical Cattrall presentation of a child. What are the risks of our table of specifications? The next is risk of surgery. If there is, of course, a preoperative dysfunction like a facial palsy, which you see preoperatively, which can be because one of the complications of chronic supraortic otitis media is facial palsy, which is an extracranial complication. So they can have a preoperative dysfunction. So the risk of surgery is there, and you need to basically convince the patient about that. Then again, there can be anatomical anomalies like low-lying dura, like forward push sinus, like high riding jugular bulb. So the surgeon should be careful. And whenever, if there is a complication, there is a big question mark basically that should everybody who is going a mastoid surgery should undergo a CT scan or not. So, there is a if it's a straightforward case of a chronic supraactive hepatitis media and you don't have any complications, you don't have any intracranial, extracranial complications, you can go away without a CT scan. You can just have a mastoid X-ray. The aim of the mastoid X-ray is just to see the dural plate and the sigmoid plate, and whether it's what you call a cellular mastoid or it's basically non-cellular, acellular mastoid. So this is the aim. Otherwise, it can't give you much of a definition of the extension of disease. Then again, if you are suspecting basically a disease which is extensive, or you're suspecting any sort of complications, it's always better to go for a CT scan preoperatively when you're doing, especially some of the people, sometimes there is only a very small perforation in the attic which can hardly be seen, because or there is a small bulge or there's a small granulation tissue. There's a history of foul smelling discharge basically, but you can't see any discharge there. You see only a granulation. You don't even see a perforation there. You always go for a CT scan. You'll be astonished to know that there will be a huge cholesteatoma which will be following that. So in those conditions, basically try to use a CT scan for your, but as a what you call a very easy sort of a straightforward mucosal disease in which you see everything and there is no complication, there is no need for a CT scan. Complication associated with surgery, if you have, you need to, whenever you're doing a bone neutroplasty, what we used to do was we used to put a small finger, basically to see the size. So you can use any method what you like, basically to just make sure that you have removed enough of that cartilage to make a good metaplasty. Because this is one thing, if there is no metaplasty or metaplasty is not of adequate size, you can't go and inspect the cavity. And when you can't inspect the cavity, you can't clean the cavity. That's a source of infection which may always be there. There's a sort of discomfort to the patient because the patient will also always keep on coming to you. You need to remove, basically when you are operating for a cholesteatoma, you need to make sure that you've taken the whole of the cholesteatoma. You need to go right up to the ossicles, because it's a Prusak space which is said to be the basic space from where the cholesteatoma starts initially. So you need to go to the attic, you need to go to the ossicles, you need to clear it, everything, just to make it sure that it doesn't reoccur. And you take your time and you clean the cavity and you make sure. Then in regular post-operative follow-ups are very important, basically, for canal wall stenosis. So otological survey is if you basically preoperative plan, make a plan for ear surgery, that host of ear surgeries. I don't want to discuss decompressions or Sackus decompressions and so on and so forth, and as an approach to the different areas like trans-tympanic approach or transmastoid approach. But I'll take a general classification of regular routine surgeries like myringoplasty, staphylotomy, ossicular reconstruction, and dry ears. They are clean surgeries. Clean means the cavity is usually clean. The dirty cavities or clean contaminated surgeries basically with discharging ears or with cholesteatoma. When you've got an active disease. Post-operatively, what can be basically the infections which can occur? They can be wound infections. First of all, if you've got a wound which is not properly healed, because sometimes the incision, sometimes the diathermy that we use extensively, or sometimes using a diathermy for basically giving incisions, and sometimes the cavity is infected preoperatively. They can all lead to infections. Infections resulting in discharge from the ear canal, sometimes you haven't basically, not immediate, late post-operatively, sometimes you have not been able to remove the whole of the disease, or sometimes something is left behind, or basically the hidden areas from like sinus tympani or facial recess where you have left the disease and they again basically start with discharging here. So that can happen. The failure of the tympanic membrane to close, that's also seen that sometimes the tympanic membrane graft may take up, sometimes the graft may not take up for any reason, for infection, for faulty technique, for basically using the wrong, there are so many complications, I don't want to be, but in a blanket statement, there can be a failure, basically the tympanic membrane to close as opposed to, and then sometimes there can be infection. and particularly an infected ear can have labyrinthitis also. If you remember vestibular neuritis and labyrinthitis, basically that becomes very easy for you to understand labyrinthitis. Surgical prophylaxis of antibiotics. What you do is basically the purpose is that you know that these prophylaxis, as you know that there is no active infection, but you want to give something that when you're anticipating that probably that might lead to infection. So wherever there is a high risk of infection, use prophylactic antibiotics. Or if there is not a high risk, but you know that the infection would be severe if it happens like meningitis, labyrinthitis, you want to use a prophylactic antibiotics. You want to use an antibiotic in a dose in which if the surgical time exceeds half-life, you have to repeat the antibiotic. So you want to make it sure that whatever antibiotic you want to use at the time of surgery as a prophylaxis, you should make it sure that if your surgical time should match and with the half-life of the antibiotic which you're giving. And prolonged antibiotics, again, if you've given prophylaxis, they do not enhance. If you start what you call prolonged antibiotic prophylaxis, it will create higher level of resistance rather than giving you higher level of protection. So antibiotic prophylaxis, like as ENT surgeons, in addition to ear surgery and nasal graft surgery, or whenever you're doing endoscopic surgery for rhinosinusitis, which is chronic or fungal rhinosinusitis, and ear mastodectomies and cochlear implants, where there are two things. The prophylaxis is basically it's a clean cavity, not the endoscopic like rhinosinusitis and all, but for cochlear implants or basically for episiotomy by clean cavities. But you know that basically prophylaxis is good in the term that if there is an infection, the result of the infection would be very severe. Then in our country, we use prophylactic antibiotics for every surgery. But usually in the civilized world for tympanoplasty, the translatomies, and primary septal rhinoplasty or otoplasty, basically if there are no symptoms to the patient which suggest infection, they don't use prophylactic antibiotics at all, and the patient is discharged without using an antibiotic even after surgery. But in our country, basically we want to make it safe. The ratio of infections is higher. We don't follow the protocols for assessing our theaters, so generally we do prophylactic antibiotics and post-operative antibiotics. So whenever you're using an antibiotic, you have choice. Choice is influenced by whether it's used parenterally or it has to be used orally, and if the agents which are being used, basically that they cover these surgical sites or not. So, and the antibiotics should be ideally, it should be bactericidal, and it should achieve good half-life and adequate tissue concentrations. It should be cost-effective and should have minimal impact on local colonies. It should not have collateral damage. So this is a comparison basically, and this comparison shows you the difference between amoxicillin with sublactam, amoxicillin with galvanic acid, clindamycin, and cefazoloxine. And you can see basically, I'll go for the end result at 3.3 grams basically for induction and 1.5 gram every 3 hours, and if the surgery is prolonged, and then 2 grams for induction and 1.5 for every 3 hours in case of amoxicillin and sublactam, and then 900 milligrams for induction basically for clindamycin. So usually generally what we have seen as observation is clindamycin should be reserved for patients with allergic to beta-lactam. Otherwise, galvanic acid and amoxicillin is usually the best, which is recommended for antibiotic prophylaxis in any sort of otological surgery. How do you manage the surgical site infections if you've got a surgery? The infections in my basically practice, what I've seen is usually in case of a revision surgery, or whenever you have got a post-oral fistula and there is a healing which has been delayed, there is increased antibiotic usage. The patient has gone to many people and different people without any cultural sensitivity. They have used empirical treatment. And if there has been stay which has been long in the hospital because of some other comorbidities, or the patient has got other comorbidities like diabetes mellitus or any other condition which basically delays healing, this can all occur. And Ear and mastoid is listed in specific, basically classification of Orovin site, surgical site infections, and Staph aureus is the most commonest isolated organism. Surgical site infections, you want to have a look first. You see that it's an infection or it's a cellulitis. If there is an abscess, it needs to be drained. If there is no abscess, it's only cellulitis. An infection is caused by treatment failure, then you need to identify if there is any pus. You need to send it for culture sensitivity, and then you can start your basically empirical treatment. Empirical treatment is the most anticipated antibiotic which will come in the culture insensitivity. Post-operative, what are the instructions for ear surgery? As I told you earlier as well, there are some which are immediate and some which are delayed. Immediately after surgery, you need to cover the pain, you need to give prophylactic antibiotics initially and post-operative antibiotics. Once you have taken out the pack which is in the ear, you can start local ear drops. Local ear drops usually come in forms of steroids and antibiotics both, which are usually helpful. Then in some surgeries in which like episiotomies or even tempinoplasties, there are certain things which basically are instructed the patient to avoid, like avoid sneezing. You can't avoid sneezing, but you should try to sneeze with an open mouth so that the pressure doesn't come on the eustachian tube. Similarly, you should not lift weights, should not do basically popping of the ear, which is known as a Valsalva maneuver, and avoid bending head for 2 weeks, and so on and so forth. These are basically given instructions. Usually the patient who have undergone ear surgery, especially ventilation tube insertion, especially episiotomy, especially some sort of procedure with reconstruction. What is the take-home message? The take-home message is otitis media with diffusion and acute otitis media are a single significant cause of patient morbidity and cost to the health service. Chronic suppurative otitis media is an important cause of preventable hearing loss. You know that. You need to treat the disease, you need to send it to the right person. The right person should make a right decision at the right time of when to operate. And we have long-term effects on early communication, language development, auditory processing, psychosocial and cognitive development, and educational progress and achievement. This is a blanket statement basically to tell you that it's a preventable hearing loss. And if you don't treat it at the right time, if you don't operate at the right time, the problem can be basically in language development, auditory processing, social, psychological, cognitive development. Early diagnosis and treatment of acute otitis media, including rational antibiotics, empirical treatment, if you basically haven't done the culture sensitivity, should be improved by incorporating clinical algorithms. This is the way basically when you go into the clinical algorithms and you go into the guidelines, basically you know what antibiotics you should use. And of course, otoscopy, the ENT surgeons, they're well aware of it, but I would recommend that even the general practitioners, they should know how to perform otoscopy, because otoscopy is very helpful and can tell you many things. Thank you very much for being patient and listening to this perforation.